If you've ever checked your blood pressure and stared at those two numbers wondering which one actually matters, you're not alone. And if you've ever been told your blood pressure is okay for your age, this video may change how you think about that forever. Because one of those numbers is far more dangerous than most people realize, especially after 60, and focusing on the wrong one has quietly put millions of seniors at risk. Let me make you a clear promise right away. By the end of this video, you'll understand which blood pressure number is actually dangerous for seniors, why it becomes more important as we age, and how many people are falsely reassured by normal readings while real damage is already happening. This is not about panic. It's about precision. And precision saves lives. I'm Dr. Robert Harrison. For decades, I've worked with older adults who did what they were told. They checked their blood pressure. They took their medications. They followed the rules. And yet, many still suffered strokes, heart failure, kidney damage, or sudden collapse. When we looked closer, the issue wasn't that they ignored their blood pressure. It was that they were watching the wrong number, and no one explained why that mattered. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something important. When you check your blood pressure, which number do you pay more attention to, the top or the bottom? Most people instinctively focus on the bottom number. They're told that's the resting pressure, and for younger adults, that can be true. But aging changes the rules. Let me tell you about a patient named Harold. Harold was 73, active, and very disciplined about his health. Every morning, he checked his blood pressure and proudly told me, "My bottom number is perfect." His diastolic pressure stayed in the normal range for years, but his systolic pressure, the top number, had been slowly creeping upward, 140, 145, 150. Each time he was reassured. That happens with age, he was told, until one morning Harold collapsed from a stroke that no one saw coming. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Blood pressure is not just two numbers. It's a story about how your heart and blood vessels are aging, and one of those numbers tells that story much more clearly than the other, especially later in life. When you measure blood pressure, the top number is called systolic pressure. It measures the force of blood pushing against your artery walls when your heart contracts. The bottom number is diastolic pressure. It measures the pressure when your heart relaxes between beats. For decades, both numbers were treated as equally important, but large long-term studies have shown that this balance shifts with age. In younger adults, high diastolic pressure is strongly linked to heart disease. But as we get older, arteries gradually lose their elasticity. They become stiffer. When that happens, systolic pressure rises while diastolic pressure often stays the same or even falls. This condition is called isolated systolic hypertension, and it's extremely common in seniors. Here's the part many people miss. Elevated systolic pressure is one of the strongest predictors of stroke, heart failure, and cardiovascular death in older adults. Stronger than diastolic pressure, stronger than cholesterol in some cases, and yet it's often minimized or dismissed as normal aging. Why does this happen? Because stiff arteries can't absorb the force of each heartbeat the way they used to. When the heart pumps, pressure spikes higher and travels more forcefully through the system. That excess pressure damages delicate blood vessels in the brain, kidneys, eyes, and heart itself. Over time, this damage accumulates quietly. This is why blood pressure is often called the silent killer. It doesn't fail loudly, it fails slowly, and systolic pressure is usually the first warning sign. Now here's an open loop I want you to hold on to. If systolic pressure is so dangerous for seniors, why are so many people told their blood pressure is fine? The answer lies in misunderstanding what normal really means at different ages. Many seniors are told that a systolic pressure of 140 or even 150 is acceptable for your age. But research has consistently shown that sustained systolic readings above 140 significantly increase the risk of stroke and heart disease. Above 150, the risk rises sharply. Above 160, the danger accelerates. At the same time, there's another trap. Lowering blood pressure too aggressively can cause harm. especially if diastolic pressure drops too low. When diastolic pressure falls below about 60, the heart itself may not receive enough blood flow. This can cause dizziness, fatigue, confusion, and increased risk of falls. In some cases, it can even worsen heart outcomes. So now we have a dangerous balancing act. High systolic pressure damages organs. Too low diastolic pressure starves the heart, and many seniors are caught in the middle without anyone explaining what's happening. This leads us to an important concept that almost no one talks about outside medical circles: pulse pressure. Pulse pressure is the difference between your systolic and diastolic numbers. For example, if your blood pressure is 150/70, your pulse pressure is 80. A wide pulse pressure is a sign of stiff arteries and increased cardiovascular risk. Many seniors have wide pulse pressure without ever being told it matters. This is why someone with a blood pressure of 150/70 may actually be at higher risk than someone with 140/90. The second reading looks worse to most people, but the first reflects arterial stiffness and high systolic load, which is especially dangerous in older adults. Here's where confusion deepens. Some people try to lower systolic pressure by adding medications that also drive diastolic pressure too low. They feel weak, dizzy, unsteady. They assume it's aging when in reality their blood pressure is being overcorrected in the wrong direction. This is why blood pressure treatment in seniors must be individualized. One-size-fits-all targets don't work. Numbers on paper matter, but how you feel matters too. Let me ask you another question. Have you ever felt lightheaded when standing up, or unusually tired after a medication change? These can be signs that diastolic pressure has dropped too low, even if your systolic number looks better. Now let's come back to the core question. Which number is actually dangerous? For most seniors, sustained high systolic pressure is the primary threat. It increases the risk of stroke, heart failure, kidney disease, vision loss, and cognitive decline. Diastolic pressure still matters, but its role changes with age. The goal is not to chase youthful numbers. The goal is to protect organs and maintain stability. Here's another open loop. If systolic pressure is the main danger, why do some lifestyle changes lower the bottom number but barely affect the top? And what actually helps reduce systolic pressure without causing weakness or dizziness? That's what we'll cover next, because in part 2, I'm going to explain why systolic pressure continues to rise even when you feel fine, what actually improves artery flexibility, which lifestyle changes are backed by research, and why some blood pressure medications help seniors while others quietly cause harm. Before we move on, I want you to remember this. Blood pressure problems rarely announce themselves. They don't cause pain. They don't give warnings. And the number most people ignore is often the one that matters most. Now let's talk about what actually helps, because understanding which number is dangerous is only useful if you know what to do about it. This is where many seniors feel frustrated. They're told their blood pressure is high, they're given medication, and yet they still don't feel quite right. Or the numbers improve on paper, but dizziness, fatigue, or weakness appear instead. That's not success, that's imbalance. The first thing to understand is this. Systolic pressure behaves differently than diastolic pressure, and it responds to different strategies. Trying to lower both numbers the same way often creates problems, especially later in life. Systolic pressure is driven largely by arterial stiffness. As arteries age, they lose elasticity. They no longer expand easily with each heartbeat. This causes pressure to spike higher when the heart pumps. That's why systolic pressure continues to rise with age, even in people who eat well, stay active, and feel generally healthy. This also explains something many seniors find confusing. You can feel perfectly fine and still have dangerously high systolic pressure. There may be no warning signs, no pain, no symptoms. That's why relying on how you feel alone can be misleading. One of the most effective ways to influence systolic pressure is improving vascular flexibility. That means reducing inflammation, improving circulation, and lowering excess strain on blood vessels. This is where lifestyle plays a powerful role, often more than people realize. Let's start with movement. You do not need intense exercise to help systolic pressure. In fact, overly strenuous activity can sometimes raise it temporarily. What research consistently shows is that regular moderate movement, especially walking, improves arterial elasticity over time. Even 20 to 30 minutes of walking most days can lower systolic pressure without pushing diastolic pressure too low. Walking also improves insulin sensitivity, reduces inflammation, and enhances blood vessel function. All of these directly affect systolic pressure. The key is consistency, not intensity. Now let's talk about salt, one of the most misunderstood topics in blood pressure. Some seniors are told to eliminate salt completely. Others are told it doesn't matter. The truth is somewhere in between. In salt-sensitive individuals, excess sodium can raise systolic pressure significantly. But in older adults, over-restricting salt can cause low blood volume, dizziness, weakness, and dangerously low diastolic pressure. This is especially true for those on certain medications. The goal is not zero salt. The goal is balance. Whole foods with naturally occurring sodium behave very differently than processed foods loaded with refined salt. Reducing processed foods while maintaining adequate hydration is often far more effective than extreme salt restriction. Hydration itself is another overlooked factor. Many seniors intentionally limit fluids to avoid nighttime bathroom trips. Unfortunately, dehydration thickens the blood and increases vascular resistance, which can raise systolic pressure. Adequate hydration helps blood flow more smoothly through stiff arteries, reducing pressure spikes. Stress is another powerful driver of systolic pressure. Chronic stress triggers repeated adrenaline release, which raises heart rate and constricts blood vessels. Over time, this keeps systolic pressure elevated even at rest. This is why relaxation techniques, deep breathing, and better sleep often lower systolic pressure, sometimes more effectively than medication adjustments. Now let's address medications honestly and carefully. Blood pressure medications save lives. But not all medications work the same way, and not all are ideal for every senior. Some medications lower systolic pressure effectively while preserving diastolic pressure. Others lower both, sometimes too aggressively. One common issue in older adults is overlowering diastolic pressure. When diastolic pressure drops too low, coronary arteries, which supply the heart muscle itself, may not receive adequate blood flow. This can lead to fatigue, chest discomfort, or worsening heart function, even though systolic numbers look improved. This is why symptoms matter. If blood pressure treatment leaves you dizzy, lightheaded when standing, unusually tired, or mentally foggy, those are not normal side effects to ignore. They may be signs that blood pressure is being lowered in the wrong way. This brings us to monitoring and how blood pressure should actually be tracked. Single readings in a clinic are often misleading. Stress, time of day, and activity level all affect blood pressure. Home readings taken correctly at consistent times provide a much clearer picture. Morning readings are especially important because elevated systolic pressure in the morning is strongly linked to stroke risk. If your systolic pressure spikes in the morning and comes down later in the day, that still matters. Those morning surges place stress on the brain and heart when blood vessels are least protected. Another important concept is trends, not single numbers. A slow upward creep in systolic pressure over months or years is far more concerning than an occasional high reading. That gradual rise reflects progressive arterial stiffness. Now let's return to pulse pressure, because this concept ties everything together. A widening gap between systolic and diastolic pressure is a sign that arteries are losing elasticity. Research has shown that wide pulse pressure is associated with higher risk of stroke, heart failure, and cognitive decline in older adults. Yet most people are never told to look at it. For example, a blood pressure of 160/70 produces a pulse pressure of 90, a red flag. Even if the bottom number looks good, the stress on arteries is significant. This is why treatment should aim to gently reduce systolic pressure without collapsing diastolic pressure. That balance is the goal. Now here's something empowering. Small, steady changes often produce meaningful improvements over time. Better sleep, daily walking, improved diet quality, reduced stress, and proper hydration all work together to reduce systolic pressure. None of these are dramatic.